Alright guys, welcome to Philosophical Inquiries. And today I actually have a very special video, Euthyphro's Dilemma. So recently I actually read Euthyphro by Plato, right? So if you haven't read the book yet, that's actually okay because let me give you a brief summary. So the two characters in this dialogue is Euthyphro and Socrates. And Euthyphro sees Socrates at the king's porch of Archon, right? And he's wondering why Socrates has left Lyceum. And now he asks Socrates, why did you leave Lyceum? And Socrates says that Meletus actually accused him of corrupting the youth, corrupting the young, and him inventing new gods. Now, Euthyphro um, is there because he's trying to prosecute his father, right? And Socrates is like, whoa, 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 whoa. Are you trying to prosecute your father, right? Like, that's impious. And, funny enough, Euthyphro actually brings up, pious and impious. And Socrates, being Socrates, the man he is, the Socratic method, the Elenkist method, all that goes into the work of Socrates. And Socrates asks him, of course, what is the nature of pious or impious? Or you could say the nature of good and bad, right? And Euthyphro would eventually answer with, oh, it's pious and impious is just what the gods love. And soon enough, Socrates has him cornered, right? Socrates is questioning him so much, but we'll get into that right now. So it starts off with this. Socrates asks, is the pious loved by the gods because it is pious, or is it pious because it is loved by the gods? Now, if you were to answer the first, that is the pious loved by the gods because it is pious, if it is true that it is pious and that it is loved by the gods because it is pious, then that means the gods don't ground pious. The gods do not define pious. And if it is just pious because it is loved by the gods, then anything can literally be good or bad, both at the same time. And Socrates, ultimately in the Euthyphro, argues from a relativistic view, critiquing Euthyphro's view, right? And so this question really just asks whether moral truths are independent of divine approval or defined by it. And so Socrates uses analogies to explain the distinction between cause and effect in relational properties. For example, a thing is in the state of being carried because someone carries it, not the other way around. A thing is visible because it is seen, not seen because it is visible. A thing is in the state of being loved because someone loves it. It is not loved simply because it is in that state. In the Euthyphro, right? Euthyphro identifies the nature of pious with what the gods love. However, Socrates, again, like I said, being Socrates, points out that he has merely told him an effect and not the true nature or essence of pious. Okay, he's basically saying, yeah, if pious is what is loved, right? Oh, people love goodness, but that's not telling me the nature or the essence of what good is. You're just telling me an attribute or effect of it. So why is this a problem, you might ask? Well, if you're a believer in classical theism or a monotheistic religion like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, you would affirm several divine attributes of God that include omnipotence, omniscience, omnibenevolence, eternal, or everlasting. Right? The Euthyphro dilemma can be modernized to actually challenge this classical theist concept of God. The Euthyphro dilemma looks at whether morality is created by or independent of God. It looks like this. Is something good because God commands it, or does God command it because it is good? Right? And here's a quick image that I got online. Does God create moral laws or follow them? If God follows them, then God is not omnipotent. Then if God creates them, then how is God omnibenevolent? Whoa, we're stuck in this dilemma. How do we answer this? Here's a hypothetical syllogism, right? That, one, if moral goodness depends on God's commands, then morality is arbitrary. Two, if moral goodness is independent of God's commands, then God is not the ultimate foundation of morality. Three, therefore either morality is arbitrary or God is not the ultimate foundation of morality. Let's critique this like scholastics. Euthyphro's dilemma has a problem first. It assumes that God and goodness are two separate things. This is not the case, for we must affirm the doctrine of actus purus, which you can actually find in Aristotle and many of the works like Thomas Aquinas and the Scholastics. Now, not every Christian denomination affirms the actus purus, right? There can be strict doctrines that say that God's essence. There's a like for example, the Orthodox position has a essence and energies distinction, but they still affirm that God's essence is actus purus, basically like that God's essence is pure actuality. But there's a distinction between his energies, and his energies. By what I mean by energies, I just say his actions. And so, for we must affirm the doctrine of actus purus, which just means God is pure actuality. There is no potential in God. God is absolutely perfect and has all possible attributes. And you might say, well, whoa, evil is an attribute, therefore God has evil. Well, no, that's not the case, right? Because evil is a deprivation of good, like such as St. Augustine defined, right? Or Augustine. Augustine defined evil as the deprivation of good. For example, it's the same way how cold is just the absence of heat. And you can see this in Descartes. He calls it material falsity, right? And so God doesn't have the property, not property, but God doesn't have the attribute of being a deceiver, because in the same way Descartes critiques this and say, well, if God is a deceiver, then God is not God, right? Because a deceiver is an imperfection. To deceive is an imperfection, and we would say that God is not imperfect. God is absolutely perfect. God exists as himself. There is no distinction between God's essence and existence, because if there was a difference, his existence would have to be caused by something else. Therefore, God and good are not two different things, but rather God equals good. God's goodness himself. So by nature, God is essentially good. Now, the thing with divine simplicity, not divine simplicity, actus purus, it allows us to answer objections like, well, could God possibly not exist? Well, no, because there is no potentiality in God. God is existence himself, right? God is goodness himself. God didn't create the laws of logic. God is logical by nature himself, right? And what is it called? Parts. Actually, in Aristotle's metaphysics, Aristotle talks about how composite things are in potential, right? If something has parts, then composition also implies potential, and that potential has to be actualized for it to have a unity, right? So in the same way, actus purus and divine simplicity go together. God has no parts, because parts imply potential, and there is no potential in God, because that would create a serious problem, right? And therefore, that's why in any classical theist, they affirm that God is the uncaused causer, the first mover, right? You can see this in Aquinas' 5 ways in the argument from motion, right? And a simple argument for God could be like the Aristotelian argument, that whatever moves from potential to actual requires a cause. And there must be something above all these chains of causes for the sake of not an infinite regress. Why? Because an infinite regress would preclude definition and completeness, which just means that knowledge requires the understanding of finite causes. You can't have infinite causes, because if there was an infinity, then it would imply that knowledge would become impossible. And arguing from the impossibility of the contrary, that cannot be the case. Reductio ad absurdum. That's a self-refuting position. And so, in other words, this dilemma is a false dichotomy. God and goodness are not two different things, but rather God is goodness himself. And if you guys want to get a little bit more deeper, you might ask, well, is there distinctions between God's attributes, like omnipotence, omnibenevolence, and omniscience? I believe the scholastic position is that no, but it's just called virtual distinctions, meaning that we make distinctions in our mind when we conceive of it. We conceive of it differently. Also, whenever you're ever making an argument about God, make sure when you're applying terms to God, apply it univocally, not equivocally, because we don't want to relate God anthropomorphically, right? We don't want to say, oh, God gets angry. We would say God gets angry, but that's kind of anthropomorphic. So be careful on how you use the terms to, describe God, right? For example, this fried chicken is so good. It's not the same way. It's not the same good as I say in God is good, right? Saying that God is good, the goodness in that sentence is not the same as saying KFC is good, right? So, terms or definitions of words to God that are applicable to God are applied univocally. And you can actually search up Aquinas' analogical predication. Really take a quick look on that. And so Aristotle, my boy, however, also argued that for the necessity and the goodness of the first mover, right? And he says the first mover's existence is necessary, and in that necessity, it is good. This necessity is defined in three ways: what is enforced, going against its tendency, that on which well-being is conditional, and whatever cannot be in any other way than absolutely, right? The first mover's existence underpins the continuous life of the heavens and the natural world, whose activation also constitutes its pleasure, which is compared to the best moments of human life. The first mover sustains the existence of substances itself, and without the first mover, the world and substance would be perishable. And Aristotle says that the end of a thing, notably its final cause or its purpose, is essentially good. That's why if you read the Nicomachean Ethics, the very first sentence is that all actions are ultimately aimed at some good, right? And that's basically it. If you do check out the metaphysics, actually, I really liked the book. It was really good. You could watch my video rating on it, but we need to note that Aristotle's God is not the same God as Aquinas, obviously, but Aquinas derives a lot of, or basically scholastics, like medieval metaphysics, derive a lot from Aristotle's metaphysics, right? The concept of God being the first mover, the concept of God being pure actuality without any parts, right? And thank you. That's basically it.